Okay, I don't know if we have slides. Yes, we do. Great. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Pull up my notes. Right. Okay, so where we left off yesterday was really, yesterday I was talking about the sort of analysis of how young girls feel in places, and the method that we used did take us to what they would want. And this is the sort of summary list of that. And a lot of the things I think have been covered. And in the interest of time, I'm actually just going to focus on the last one. And that's to be considered. And I think for us, this is really important because it's about meaningful engagement and not that sort of tokenism that I think you were alluding to, which is actually really hard. And I think we've all probably done it. And I'm, and I think that's one of the sort of starting blocks for me personally, is to sort of say, I don't want to do that. And I don't want to do tokenistic gestures, and it's really hard to do that in funding landscapes, and things are out of your control, particularly from a practitioner perspective, because projects can come and go out of your grasp. And so, so for us, a really useful framework to kind of test this idea of tokenism is sort of, I almost feel like when I first saw this, it's sort of when I was a sort of younger 20-year-old, I just felt, oh, that's it, and it's Sherry Arnstein's framework. Of citizen participation. And it's something that came out of the sort of post-war era when there was a lot of top-down, quite technocratic, blueprint approaches to planning. And she sort of categorizes these ladders, and going from sort of non-participation and manipulation, which there is a lot of, all the way up to sort of genuine citizen control. And because for her, she says that, participation without redistribution of power is essentially a con. And I think that's the thing where citizens, that redistribution of power doesn't actually happen. So citizens will always be diminutive in kind of relationships with anyone, whether that's the private sector or even, I think, the state. So with that in mind, like our kind of favorite method right now is this idea of peer research. And I introduced it yesterday, so I don't think I kind of really need to introduce it. But for those of you who weren't in the room, it's this idea of people with lived experiences. Often the banal, everyday lived experiences, doing research on their own lives. And so that's the method that I'm going to talk about today, which we've decided to use with young girls and women. So why peer research? There is this idea that it embeds sort of the pursuit of social justice within the research. And I think that's what actually fundamentally we're talking about, is social justice for this broad group and category of women. It is about the intentions about democratizing research processes. Often research is held in these kind of castles of knowledge and universities, which actually aren't very accessible. I come from LSE, which I think is so inaccessible to local young Londoners, and it really disturbs me. Communities are traditionally not present in knowledge production. I have done a lot of work on high streets, and I just feel I am never accountable to my research subjects in the way that I am now through this method. There is this idea that it's capacity building. I do like to think, and I've seen it with my own eyes, that the young girls that I work with, they get a kind of confidence in themselves, but also a confidence on the matter at hand, because everyone is impacted by the built environment, but not everyone participates in the current existing processes by which planning seeks consent from citizens. It's this idea of co-producing knowledge, which we've talked about, but also it's about saying, actually, let's produce knowledge that's relevant to the communities that we're talking about. Often academics can come up with the right answers for the wrong problems. I think everyone can do that, actually. As I mentioned yesterday, it's really popular in health work, but actually less so in urban studies. And I don't know, Rachel and I were talking about this yesterday. I don't know of anyone doing this in urban studies. There could be, but I don't know. I don't know. And it's usually people financially compensated for their time. However, like everything, there are problems. And I think there are obviously ethical issues around community control and that sort of dimension of power. There is this risk, and I think that's what, Rachel, what you talked about so eloquently, about homogenizing and objectifying people with lived experience, where you end up just categorizing people as women and girls. And we know that's problematic, and yesterday it was discussed a lot. It results in uneasy shared group categories. I am uneasy by the category in which we're working, and that's something we're trying to work on. There's this question of how much it actually democratizes research, because often when decision-making is held away, what's the point of putting that knowledge into a community when they will never have control anyway? And that's because power relations are so complex and people don't let go of power, basically. So for me, my approach to set up this research in residence was first and foremost a design of an institution, because if not, it risks, I think for this work to be meaningful and impactful, it can't just exist as sort of isolated projects. And my first design is almost sort of like this thing that doesn't actually exist at the LSE because it's really hard to do, is to set up almost, so I've had a lot, I've taught on the MSc for many years, and which is actually the program that set up LSE Cities under this banner of the social and the physical interact each other. So let's set up something that's about architecture and sociology. And it really defined the department, the MSc. Recently, because we want to get money, we've set up an executive MSc, which is aimed at people like yourselves to come and learn about best gold star practice. And I've thought, God, what would it be if we had something right at the bottom for young people to come and learn about their environment? Wow, I'm running out of time. So originally I started this actually thinking about design, and now I'm thinking about research with the researcher in residence. So I am now going to just, I talked about where I'm working. These are the sites. So this is the method. It's a bit, you know, working as I go along, but it's effectively 4 things that we do. An online curriculum, which is possibly the most important because that underpins everything. Weekly meetings, largely on Zoom. I do a mixture of in-person and online. And that is actually really important because to convene young people in person is actually incredibly hard. So the online dimension's been revelatory because it means that we can do some in person, but then have this sort of consistent online presence during the course of their employment. We ask them to do research activities and fieldwork. So the curriculum is largely structured around a lecture that we either find or prepare ourselves, a reading, an activity, and then this discussion, bookended almost by trust. And this is a sort of an example of what these sort of weekly sessions intellectually are bannered under, the kind of questions we're asking. So for example, this is what the Miro board looks like. So this is how the young people who engage with the curriculum, they'll go online and you can see that there's a video that we prepared on what is public space, because actually that's an idea is debatable. And I have this really important principle that no matter who I'm working with, I really think that young people often, there's no dumbing down. And actually I have such high expectations of the young people I work with. And I think coming to them with high expectations is the most amazing thing I think you can do to a young person. So for example, Leslie Kern's book is there. It's a difficult text. So we give them cheat sheet notes too, for those who might find it hard to engage with her work. This is what the weekly Zoom meetings look like. So it means that our Miro board is this incredible repository of everything that's said. So these are, for example, these are the crew discussions where we're talking about what's public space. We talk about architectural elements. We talk about typologies of public spaces. And then we ask questions like, have girls been designed out? We use case studies and ask questions like, you know, how were girls designed in these case studies? Does these spaces better serve the needs and so on? And this is, for example, some of the kind of quality of the conversations that are coming out is saying, look, yeah, lighting can be done tomorrow, overnight. Well, not really overnight, but what can be done tomorrow, small scale, small impact, and how over time will that have the sort of cultural challenges of, let's say, of how young people are judged, that we know we can't fix that over time. And we foreground these conversations into this method. Research activities, this is one method, Instagram, I need to wrap up. So Instagram's great because it's just on this, brilliant. And that's what it looks like at the end. Every site is different, but this is effectively the kind of what it looks like. So we've got the curriculum here in the middle, our recordings of all of our sessions, and actually, sorry, if you go down here are all the in-person things, and that's the discussions. So in person, there's mapping that we do, and then we ask them to set up principles, and then we go back to the mapping. And for example, you set up a principle of going, I want a judgment-free space. Right, what does that look like? So this was that park that I mentioned yesterday with the local authority. There is a Muga already, and they want to build another football pitch here. So we said, let's take those principles and design what you think that would look like using those principles. And we did that again in Brent, but this time with a larger consortium of people. So the young researchers, they held the workshop with a wider group who we invited. And rather than looking at one site, we looked at the whole borough. And I actually think this is really interesting with your Q methodology, because we almost, it's like a variant of it where we have all these images and ideas, and then you go, where do we want them? And that's when lighting, actually for me, the favorite interventions was this idea of stitching together council estates that they know are being underfunded into the proper city. And that was one of the proposals. And the benefit of like, well, what does LSE do? Is that means that we can package this stuff into maps that are digestible by a local authority. So this is something that we've already presented to the local authority and we'll be doing again next week, into reports like this. thank you, and I'll just leave that slide up so when you can listen to it, you can see these are some things that we think this method has given value to the project that maybe traditional methods might not do. I was planning for 10 minutes. Thank you. Sorry, I talked really quickly, but yeah, maybe I should have done my methods yesterday. And